think we'll have time to accomplish everything, so we'll get started. I want to welcome our witnesses, Chairman Kay and Commissioner Ann Marie Buerkle. This is your second time before the subcommittee, and we appreciate you being here today to testify. The Commission has an important job overseeing tens of thousands of consumer products used by almost all Americans every day. The success of the Commission is not only measured in public safety and education, but in the cooperation and engagement of all stakeholders, including consumers, manufacturers, retailers, and Congress. Therefore, I'd like to highlight the essential role that stakeholder engagement plays in the Commission's mission. It's critical that the Commission lives up to its mission of protecting consumers through product recalls, educating the public on public safety hazards, and ensuring the safety of consumer products. However, mission success also means engaging in cooperative relationships with the private sector to make sure that American commerce is not adversely burdened by unnecessary regulations. This Commission has engaged in a series of highly controversial rulemakings without engaging impacted stakeholders. While I'm encouraged to hear the progress is being made, particularly to address the issues surrounding recreational off-highway vehicles in a manner that's acceptable to all the parties, it concerns me that so often the Commission's efforts to involve stakeholders are ad hoc and reactive in nature. As I mentioned earlier, stakeholder engagement also means engagement with Congress. I've been crystal clear on my desire for the Commission to take meaningful steps to reduce third-party testing burdens on small businesses. For 2 consecutive years, this subcommittee specifically designated $1 million for third-party test burden reductions. Yet, it frustrates me that there's been no real tangible relief to small businesses despite the amount of resources the Commission has been provided. Instead, and against the will of Congress, the Commission continues to pursue changes to the detriment of the Commission's highly successful voluntary recall program. The President's fiscal year 2017 budget request for the Commission totals $130 million, or $5.5 million increase over enacted. I'd like to stress that in a time of scarce resources, it's the utmost importance that the Commission prioritize its activities to where the Commission has clearly authority to act and where the need for consumer protection is the greatest. However, I was encouraged to see the Commission reevaluate its proposal to create a Commission-led nanotechnology research center and has instead formed a partnership with the National Institute of Health on nanotechnology research. This seems to me to be a much more measured approach, and I'm very interested to learn more about this initiative and the $3 million requested for research into the chronic hazards of nanotechnology. Once again, the Commission's budget request includes the authority to collect a user fee from importers in an effort to expand the import surveillance product program. The committee has rejected the Commission's proposal to collect an import fee for the past 2 years, and I'm curious to learn if anything in your proposal has changed. As you know, I represent Jacksport and Jacksonville, Florida, and I know firsthand the importance of surveillance of consumer goods, and I support the Commission's effort to stop non-compliant products from entering our nation's ports. But I have significant concerns with the lack of collaboration and discussion with the importers in this monumental policy change. Chairman Kay, you've said that one of your top priorities when it comes to rulemaking will be addressing the question of public safety hazards. So I look forward to hearing from you and Commissioner Buerkle on what the CPSC is doing to prevent tragic and regrettable injuries from consumer goods. So once again, we welcome both of you all here today, and I look forward to your testimony. I'd like to turn now to the Ranking Member, Mr. Serrano, for any opening he might make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for getting us this wonderful large room for our hearing today. Makes it look very crowded, which is good. I'd like to welcome back with you before the subcommittee, Consumer Product Safety Commission Chairman Elliott Kay, and my former colleague from the greatest congressional delegation ever in Congress, the New York delegation, Commissioner Ann Marie Buerkle. It's good to see you both, and I thank you for your service to our country. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is an independent agency responsible for monitoring the products sold or imported into the U.S. Their work is crucial to ensure the safety, health, and well-being of American consumers against faulty and dangerous products. The CPSC is requesting $130.5 million for fiscal year 2017. This request is a $5.5 million or 4.4% increase from appropriations enacted during the last fiscal year. This increase will be used to expand import surveillance efforts at our nation's ports, carry out important work regarding nanotechnology research and development, and conduct hazard analysis and risk assessments on the potential side effects of crumb rubber, a surface product made of recycled tires that has become a staple at playgrounds and athletic fields across our country. In fiscal year 2015, nearly 80% of the consumer products recalled were imported products. The CPSC currently has the capacity to staff 6% of U.S. ports, and this year's request would expand that to roughly 7%. This means that the CPSC would be able to monitor roughly 65% of all consumer product import entry. As more products reach our borders from abroad, we must do everything in our power to ensure this vital agency has every tool and resource necessary to keep faulty goods and products away from our store shelves. In addition, our colleagues in the House and Senate have recently sent letters to the Obama administration asking for answers on the safety of crumb rubber. Although links to certain illnesses like cancer have not been established, more research must be conducted to ensure this product is safe for our children and athletes. The Commission's funding request will ensure more work is done to get these answers. I support the Commission's request for a modest increase in funding to address these issues, and I urge my colleagues to do so as well. These new investments are necessary to ensure we stay on top of the challenges we face in our ever-changing economy. I hope my colleagues will recognize the Commission's important work during today's hearing. Our constituents have a reasonable expectation that the products they buy are safe and do not pose a threat to their family's health. We have a duty and an obligation to ensure that those expectations are met. Again, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our hearing and for your service to Americans. Mr. Chairman, I may add that you and I are the classic example of two people who don't necessarily agree on everything, but like each other. I mean,
Speak for yourself.
right, I could be nasty in two languages, so if I was you, I would be just accept it as it is. Anyway, we are living proof of that, notwithstanding your comments. But there's one thing here that I worry about, and that is that there are cost-cutting measures that we take. There are issues about the budget, and those are legitimate, and we may disagree, agree, that's another thing. But when it comes to the products that come to our children's hands, to our store shelves, I think we can all agree that it's not government intervention. It's government making sure that another country is not sending us stuff that is not good for us. So I think we have to balance that as we look at the budget this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point well taken. Now we're going to turn to our witnesses, Chairman Kaye, Chairman Buckle. If you all would limit your remarks to 5 minutes, that will give us more time for questions, and your formal statement will be submitted for the record. So, Commissioner Kaye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Crenshaw, Ranking Member Serrano, and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to speak again about the work of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission and our budget for fiscal year 2017. As I noted last year, CPSC's vital health and safety mission touches every home in some way each and every day. We believe we provide an excellent return on investment for the American people. We run a very lean operation, especially considering the thousands of different product categories in our jurisdiction, from hoverboards to laminate flooring. And we cover them all with a budget in the millions, not the billions. We are very appreciative of the continued bipartisan support for the Commission and our work. We saw this support in the overwhelming, nearly unanimous vote to pass the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act of 2008, and we see it in the appropriation levels the Congress keeps providing. These levels have allowed our dedicated staff to drive standards development to make children's products safer, to increase our enforcement effectiveness, and to better educate consumers about product hazards, especially drowning prevention, brain safety, poison prevention, and TV furniture tip-overs. Our proposed budget reflects our staff's continuing efforts to carry out and enforce CPSIA-driven enhancements to consumer product safety. Unfortunately, not all of these priorities and requirements are achievable at our current funding levels. For that reason, we were pleased to see the President include in his budget certain important consumer product safety initiatives. These initiatives, if funded, will absolutely advance consumer safety and at the same time provide real value to those in industry making or importing compliant products. First, we are again seeking sufficient funding to achieve fully the intent of and the direction in Section 222 of the CPSIA. Section 222 called on the Commission to develop a risk assessment methodology to identify at our nation's ports of entry likely violative imported consumer products. In 2011, we created a small-scale RAM pilot that has been a success. However, the pilot alone does not fulfill the direction and vision of Congress, and without full implementation, we will not be able to integrate sufficiently the CPSC into the much larger U.S. government-wide effort coming online later this year to create a single window for import and export filing of all products. If the CPSC cannot be integrated into the single window, if we can be integrated, we can transform Congress's vision of a national scope, risk-based, data-driven screening at the ports into reality. A reality that would mean safer products in the hands of American consumers and faster entry for importers of compliant products. Our proposed budget also includes increased funding to pursue a Healthy Children at Home, at Play, and in School initiative. This initiative includes researching two pressing public health concerns. The first, exposure to potential chronic hazards related to nanotechnology in consumer products, and the second, which has already been mentioned, exposure to potential chronic hazards in crumb rubber used in artificial field, turf, and playgrounds. In fact, we were pleased to be part of a recent announcement along with our sister agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to begin a comprehensive study of crumb rubber in playgrounds and in artificial turf. Chemical exposure to our children is a critical public health concern, and providing meaningful answers to parents on these questions is one of my top priorities. While the joint agency crumb rubber effort that is now underway is a huge step forward, we cannot solve this problem without Congress fully engaging on this topic as well. Finally, as I discussed last year when testifying before you, one of the soundest investments we can make, and that I can make as chairman of this agency, is to continue to foster a culture of civility and dialogue, both at the Commission and with our stakeholders. As the current campaign season sometimes reminds us, the political currents flow powerfully against reaching out and attempting a collaborative discussion on difficult policy questions. Despite those pressures, and I cannot overstate how intense, and I might add counterproductive they are, I am pleased to work with a group of commissioners who share my view that there is a better and more productive way to solve challenging problems. There is no doubt that we have product safety challenges that must be solved, and I look forward to answering your questions about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. And now we'll hear from Ms. Burkle.
Thank you, Chairman Crenshaw and Ranking Member Serrano. Once again, I am delighted to be here in front of this committee and the subcommittee and talk to you about Consumer Product Safety Commission. I just want to say to you that your close attention to our budget does make a difference and can truly affect our agency's behavior. Your influence is well illustrated by the progress we've made on recreational off-highway vehicles known as ROVs. When I was here last year before this subcommittee, the agency was heading in the wrong direction, pushing ahead with rulemaking towards a mandatory standard. That was in spite of strong bipartisan congressional letters urging us to work with industry to develop voluntary standards. The power of the purse was harder to ignore. Once it was understood that insisting on this mandatory standard was going to cost serious money, our strategy changed. Including language on this issue in our appropriation has just about clinched a good result for everyone. The industry did its part and worked hard to come up with a strong voluntary standard that will save lives and prevent injuries in the years to come. I thank you for your perseverance on this matter and encourage you to remain engaged on all of our CPSC issues. I also want to thank you for devoting some of our last appropriation to test burden reduction. I continue to be dismayed at the extremely slow pace of our efforts, but there does appear to be a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Specifically, some of the 2015 funds that we spent on test burden reduction could finally produce some modest relief for manufacturers this year. It looks like virtually all of our 2016 funds will be used in the development of instruments that could test for the presence of phthalates more cheaply. We are a country in fiscal peril. Our national debt is in excess of $19 trillion. It's critical that every application of appropriated funds be transparent and that the federal agencies spending the American people's hard-earned tax dollars are accountable for their actions. Excessive government spending also contributes to our nation's woes in a second way. It feeds the regulatory state, whose cost is estimated at $2 trillion annually, imposing an immense handicap on our American companies. The growing morass of regulation makes it more difficult and more expensive to do business in this country. The negative effects of such policies are felt throughout our American economy. CPSC only accounts for a relatively small portion of our nation's spending. However, because we have jurisdiction over approximately 15,000 types of consumer products, we have a disproportionate impact on the regulated community, consumers, as well as the marketplace. I did not support the Commission's overall 2017 budget request of $130.5 million because in part it calls for a 5.5% increase, $5.5 million increase over current funding levels. I firmly believe our mission and our goals can be accomplished at our current funding levels. The total amount of the requested budget increase is not my only concern. I also have reservations about how those funds will be spent. The agency's request for doubling from $2 to $4 million in nanotechnology research is of concern to me. I respectfully submit that Congress should insist on accounting for the huge sums of money that have already been spent on nanotechnology across the spectrum of government before allowing any increase. CPSC has moved towards a more fiscally responsible approach to growth in the area of import surveillance. In terms of port staffing as well as technology, we are analyzing our needs more carefully and scaling back our prior request. To be clear, even on this smaller scale, I remain staunchly opposed to a user fee on imports. I believe that our operations are very different from other agencies who have been authorized to collect import fees. Given our more limited presence and role at the ports, I continue to believe that our imposition of fees could and would and should raise constitutional concerns. Even apart from the FY17 budget request, your oversight is needed to make sure our spending follows congressional intent. The Consumer Product Safety Act instructs us to keep consumers safe from unreasonable risks of harm. Yet at times our agency devotes our resources to risks that are exceedingly low. And when we find we cannot justify a mandatory standard under our statute, the agency sometimes can resort to bullying tactics that circumvent protections built in the rulemaking process. The staff is vigorously pursuing the chairman's call for higher civil penalties, resulting in a threefold increase in penalties in FY15 over FY14. The agency has never withdrawn its proposal to make voluntary recall plans legally binding and requiring some firms to admit their products are defective and to weaken protections that help ensure CPSC statements are fair and accurate. All of this creates well-founded uncertainty, anxiety within the regulated community, and worse, a fear of retaliation. They undermine the trust and cooperation we need from these same firms. In closing, I know it is a challenge to prioritize resources, especially when you have a large and vital mission as CPSC does. We all want consumers safe, but we must find solutions that avoid imposing unnecessary burdens and wasting taxpayer dollars. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you. And to the members, before you got here, we announced that, as you all may know now, that we're in recess probably till about 3 o'clock or a little thereafter. We got a full house today, so we'll observe the 5-minute rule so everybody will have a chance to ask a question. And I'll start by asking a question about the test burden reduction, third party. You mentioned, Commissioner, that you're seeing some progress. I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm a little concerned that I hadn't seen much progress. So it's encouraging that maybe some progress is being made. As you all know, we've appropriated $1 million each year for the last 2 years to help in that. This year, I noticed you didn't ask for $1 million to kind of continue that. But maybe Commissioner Kay, Chairman Kay, you can tell us a little bit, some of the things that you all have done to kind of reduce that burden. One of the things that we did in the omnibus, we asked you to submit a report about that. And then I noticed not long ago, it's been a couple of years, I guess, you wrote that you had 3 ideas that would provide a substantial amount of third-party testing relief. So maybe you can highlight those and tell us the timetable. So just take a minute to tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. As Commissioner Burkle mentioned, I do think we're seeing progress. It has been slow for all of us, but we also recognize that until the Congress stepped in last fiscal year, which would have been December of last year, and appropriated the $1 million, that it was really running up against our core safety mission to try to allocate the resources that would have been necessary, and we were taking our lead from Congress as well, which told us to keep our eye on our core safety mission. So getting that money has made a big difference. We immediately turned it around and we focused on 2 areas. The first, and this was based primarily on stakeholder input, especially from our small business ombudsman, who unfortunately recently left the agency, but who had done an excellent job of really cataloging what would provide the most relief to the small business community and give us the most bang for the buck. So the first area we have focused on is what we call determinations, and that means trying to identify materials, whether we're talking about wood or any other type of material, cloth, that can be used without needing to be third-party tested. Can we go out there and survey the marketplace and get comfort that there will not be any type of the harmful chemicals that we regulate at violative levels in those products? Can we go out and tell the communities that are using them you are safe to use them without third-party testing them? So we have been working to expand our list of determinations. We've done 3 rulemakings this year that relate, well, 2 that relate to determinations and 1 which relates to textiles, to try to provide more clarity for the regulated community. The other area that we focused on is screening technologies. Right now, if you go to the ports, and I hope we can do this in Jacksonville, you'll see that our inspectors have handheld XRF devices where they can zap a product and tell immediately whether there's certain heavy metals in them. We need a similar type of technology for screening purposes for phthalates, the plasticizer that's added to make products softer. That is the most expensive test, phthalates testing, and right now it requires wet chemistry. It involves grinding the product down, adding it to a solution, and then putting it through a scanner. We are working, we've been giving out funds to try to accelerate the development of a handheld device that will allow for this similar type of screening, and I believe Commissioner Burkle was actually briefed on it recently and saw some of the technology that's in play. If that can come online, and if our investment that you provided us with that money can come online, that will make a huge difference in driving the cost down. Now, the last part of it is, the Congress was clear. It said reduce third-party testing costs assistant with assuring compliance. So we have to remain vigilant in making sure that any changes we make don't change the likelihood of the underlying product becoming more harmful.
Thanks for that. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Chairman Kay, your budget requests a $5.5 million increase. How does the total request related to fulfilling the Commission's mission? I know that the Republicans have a concern about over-regulating, but with the Commission having to first go to voluntary standards, I'm very concerned about under-protecting our consumers. So how does this budget play with that? Or
Thank you.
address that?
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. I don't think that anyone should have concern that the Commission is over-regulating. My concern is that because of the limited funds that we've been provided, we do not have the ability to really stay on top of emerging hazards in particular and answer pressing questions, as I mentioned, such as crumb rubber. And that's one of the reasons why we have asked, as part of the President's budget, for additional funds to address some of these emerging technologies. It seems to me that this is the way the system is supposed to work. And you look at something like nanotechnology. You have a group of scientists across the scientific community, especially in the government, who identify an emerging hazard concern, nanoparticles that come off of consumer products. The belief is that they appear and to act like asbestos, and they get embedded in children's lungs. When that's been identified through this process, and we come to the Congress and say this is a concern that we have, it seems that's exactly why we have these hearings. Congress wants to hear what the community, the scientific community in particular, which doesn't have a partisan bent, what are the scientific concerns that are coming online that we should be addressing. It seems to me it's far more efficient for Congress to allocate money at this juncture to address this concern before it becomes a full-blown public health crisis, and then, of course, it's much more expensive to address. So I feel like us coming for the second year in a row to ask for this nanotechnology money is exactly the way the system should work, and it's consistent with us trying to do our best to highlight those critical areas that we feel like we need Congress's assistance to stay on top of.
Now, both the chairman and I mentioned an issue that's of concern. Then, of course, there's the issue of the, what is it, hoverboard? Which one presents the more immediate danger, or at least which one presents a more challenge to you to figure out what the safety standards should be or not be?
So I think they both present different challenges in different ways, and I'll explain that. Hoverboards clearly, at this juncture, appear to present an acute hazard. You're either going to have a fire concern or a fall concern. The injury is immediate. The concern with crumb rubber is a concern about a chronic hazard, long-term exposure to children over time. Both of them are extremely difficult at our current funding levels to be quickly responsive to. I would say hoverboards because you're talking about complex electronic systems, and though we of course have excellent electrical engineers, we do not have a deep bench of excellent engineers. We have a small staff of electrical engineers. To pull them off of what they're doing, which we had to do, and have them work 24/7 to try to take these devices apart, means other critical work is not getting done that we had already planned on getting done. Coin cell batteries, children swallow them, they end up burning holes in their esophagus, they're fatal. Our electrical engineers are trying to get to the bottom of that. We have to pull them off that type of work to address hoverboards. If we had a deeper bench, we'd be able to be much more responsive. And similarly, one of the reasons why we were so eager to have a larger federal effort on crumb rubber, we can't handle that alone. We've got 6 or 7 toxicologists, which is what EPA can throw out a smaller problem. That's our entire toxicology division. Our mission is more than 15,000 different types of consumer products, but we are not built as an agency from a staffing perspective and a resources perspective to be on top of those in a way that the public expects us to be.
Yeah. Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, to both or to whoever wants to answer this, would it be unfair for me to ask this question because one country sends us more products than the other, or percentage-wise, what country presents our biggest challenge to us in terms of having to return items or take them off the shelf?
So 4 out of 5 recalls come from imported products, and not surprisingly, a very large percentage of those are from China.
Okay, so it is an unfair question in a way, because it's a loaded question, but it is what it is, right?
Can I just add a teeny bit to that, though? I think what's counterintuitive is that the Chinese government is actually very helpful. When we approach them with actionable information, they are very eager to try to stop manufacturers from doing what they're doing. And so we've built up, we actually have a presence on the ground right now in China. We have full-time staff there, and we have built good relationships to try to deal with these issues. But again, we don't have the type of depth and resources to really have that much more of a relationship and attack that many more different areas to try to prevent them from coming in the country.
Mr. Chairman, using CIA agents on the floor, it's kind of an overkill over in China, but anyway.
4 out of 5.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Graves and then Mr. Quigley.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, good to see you. Commissioner, good to see you. Thanks for returning. Chairman, I have a question. You've referenced several times crumb rubber. I wanted to talk about that just a little bit, because I've quite frankly followed it with a little bit of interest. It seems to be somewhat of a coordinated effort between CDC, Georgia, EPA, and then as well as your commission. And you've made several statements prior to the launch as well as since then. And I guess my concern more than any is that as you go through this process, that it's something that is decisions are made based on science and sound research and unbiased opinions. And I somewhat asked this question more of just a commitment from you and your group here. because particularly interest to me is I come from a very, very small town, only a handful of businesses in the town in which I come from, but one of them happens to be a company which recycles tires. And then I have 3 children in high school, a wife who teaches as well, and in our district, there's many of the products that you've described that would use chrome rubber, as well as manufacturers who install it. So a little bit of an interest from me. It's very important in a lot of different ways, and I know your passion is for protection, and I respect that. But I would like to have the commitment from you, though, that as you go through this investigation, that you're following all the appropriate scientific protocols and not rhetoric or any other kind of unbiased opinions or hyperboles, but you're involving all stakeholders and all science involved as you come to that conclusion. So my question is really pretty simple: is that can we have that commitment from you as a committee that it will be absence of hyperbole and other rhetoric out there, but more focused on science and unbiased opinions?
Absolutely, Congressman. That's an easy commitment to make because it's consistent with the way I operate. You've referenced decisions or statements that I've made on the subject. I've never, and I'd be surprised if you can point to one, that has declared that these products are unsafe or declared that there is a hazard. I've been very careful to say that parents have raised concerns, and I think and I'm a parent as well, as 2 young boys, parents deserve answers, but that doesn't in any way indicate that I believe I know what the answer is. I don't. And one of the reasons why I pushed to have EPA and CDC take the lead on this and work with us is that we could collectively come together and provide those answers. I have no interest in the hyperbolic rhetoric associated with this. I just want to know what the answer is. But I think and by the way, the commitment extends to, of course, making sure that all stakeholders are involved. This has been one of the unique areas where I saw that the House Commerce Committee had written, both the majority and the minority, written to the EPA to say we would like answers, and even the industry has said they're happy that the government's now studying this. I just hope that there is room that if the science is legitimate, some side is not going to be happy with the answers because people have become very polarized. I just hope that folks can accept whatever the answer is as long as it's fact-based, even if it doesn't come out the way they hope it does.
And if I could just add one thing, I would love your feedback on that as well, Commissioner. And I appreciate your approach about it because, I mean, it's important for everyone. And you're right. In your press release, I guess it was a press release, you in fact did say there has been no determination of any harmful effects. And so that is, I appreciate you saying that, but also there seems to be some appreciation or some effort to find harmful effects. And so thank you. Ms. Burkle, if you had
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do want to comment on this because I think it's very important for the record to establish that to date, there has been no change in the science that there is a causation between cancer and between chrome rubber. So we're starting where we left off, and the NBC News report was what kind of, I think, got this whole issue going. And I think it's important for us as an agency not to react to the media. They're trying to sell stories. We need to base our whatever we do on science and on facts, and make sure our approaches are reasonable, and that's the course we follow. I do have an article I'd like to submit for the record on chrome rubber, and it lists a whole body of research that's been done on this topic, because to date there has been nothing that establishes causality.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's talk a little bit more about hoverboards. Commission sent out a notice to retailers and manufacturers, I think it was last week, asking them to voluntarily recall hoverboards off the market until they meet voluntary safety standards. Obviously, you go to Walmart or Toys R Us, they're still for sale. What's next in the time frame and the process here to look at these and decide if there needs to be a mandatory recall?
So what is next is that we have more work to do. We've asked our technical staff to do what we call a product safety assessment, or a PSA, to give us their unbiased technical view as to whether or not they believe that there is a defect that poses an unreasonable risk of injury or death. We are waiting for them to continue or to conclude that process. Once they do that, What we did put in that notice was that we could deem these products or consider these products to present an imminent hazard, and that would allow us under Section 12 of the Consumer Product Safety Act to go into court and in essence ask for an injunction or seek a mandatory recall. So we have at this point kept all options on the table. We have been aggressive in both trying to identify the issue, working with Underwriters Laboratory, which had come out with the standard 2272 of electrical components in self-balancing boards. And we feel like that so far we've been encouraged by the action of many of the retailers, you mentioned two of them, that actually have stopped sale in the last day or so. And we think that is a responsible action to take at this point. Stop sale, have your product tested. If it complies with that underlying standard, you're good. If it doesn't comply, then I think it's incumbent upon those companies to begin to initiate a recall process, come to us with a recall proposal. And if-
Did you say that Toys R Us has stopped selling these?
That, I have read that publicly, that's correct.
And Walmart?
I've read that as well.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so we think that if you test it and it doesn't comply, you should start to come to us with a recall proposal to take these products off the market.
Can you guesstimate time frame before your folks are done their with their
I'd
analysis?
say within the next week or two is my hope.
Okay. Do you have something else to add? I'm sorry.
No, it's just the, with regards to hoverboards, it's been a complicated issue for the agency because it may have been that the first hoverboards that came into this country were compliant and were safe, but as time has gone on and they increased in popularity, there was a lot of the issues had to do with component parts coming from many manufacturers. It was difficult to trace back
Right.
the products to the manufacturers, and so it's been a complicated issue that the agency has really dedicated a lot of resources to.
Thank you. Last point, recalls. Consumer Federation of America informed us that of all the recalls, only about 30% of the products are actually recalled. In other words, 70% of the folks are still out there with using products we assume that they don't know. How do we do better at informing them about this? Or do they just not pay attention if they do know?
I think looking and measuring the number of products returned isn't really, it's one way to measure recall effectiveness, but recall effectiveness is another complicated issue, because if a product is very inexpensive and it was in a McDonald's lunch, or it was just something that,
McDonald's what?
in one of their Happy Meals, what a parent will do is throw it out. So it, we're not so happy. The parent will just toss it out. They're not going to take that product and go back to McDonald's. So the costs of the product, the age of the product, being able to adapt that product and maybe comply with the safety issue, so then they may not return
What do you
it.
all do to try to gauge how effective recall is, or how many people hear you?
Well, we are paying closer attention as an agency to measure recall effectiveness. Yesterday in our ops plan, I made a motion that we start to measure the progress reports that a recalling company establishes as a part of the recall, so we can maybe look more scientifically, not scientifically, but more systematically at the data coming in to try to measure it. But I think there's a lot of ways to measure recall effectiveness. One of them has to do with injury. If you look at a product, and these progress reports would help us with that, if there's no issues or no incidences post-recall, whether we get that product back or not, that's a good indication to us that that recall was effective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ridgel, and then Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our two witnesses today, thank you. Thank you for your service. Let me first say that the Consumer Product Safety Commission is absolutely essential, and I think it's just right up there with the FDA and other agencies, and I appreciate the work that you do. All of us are trying to get it right to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of the commission. And I want us to look at one particular aspect, and that's how we're leveraging the private sector in this. The compression that we're seeing on discretionary spending is going to continue, as far as I can see, into perpetuity, for a host of reasons that I won't get into here. But even if we're at our very best from the administration and Congress in the days ahead, there's still going to be pressure on the discretionary side of the budget. So even those who follow you will be struggling with this, and those who follow us, I believe, will be struggling with these very issues. But I was concerned as I looked in Commissioner Burkle's testimony on page 4, the current CPSC administration is taking other steps that damage relations with manufacturers and retailers. And first of all, look, I've been in business a long, long time, and I know there's some business people who have ill intent, and if they can, kind of sell a substandard product and knowing that it could hurt someone, they'll do it. And so I'm not saying, certainly not turn this all over completely, but I've also seen examples where, and I've been part of it too, of where industry has really leveraged. I think it took a government dollar, maybe make it, stretched it out to $4 or $5, because the industry itself, the good people, the good men and women who are in the right companies, they really don't like the ones who are getting things, they're increasing their profits the wrong way. So could you just unpack that just a little bit, Commissioner Burkle, about how maybe we're not leveraging it as much? And it's not a gotcha moment here. I'm just trying to see if we can do a better job of leveraging the private sector in all of this.
Thank you very much. So my concern with the way we treat industries, businesses, I've been at the agency 2.5 years, and I can honestly say to you, as I've traveled and visited several businesses throughout the country, all across all industry lines, they want to comply with the regulations. The regulations are complex, and the regulations can be vague. So, for instance, we talked about burden reduction, we have to assure compliance. With reporting responsibilities, that the person reporting a possible defect or violation of a regulation, if it could present a product hazard, it's vague, so sometimes that's in the way of it. But what we also have is some hostility inside of the agency in terms of there's almost a supposition that a party is guilty until they prove themselves innocent. Most companies want to do right, and I feel the Consumer Product Safety Commission should be working with and engaging with companies, showing them the way. Complications, and it's not that they're just dealing with our regulations. They're dealing with, on their municipality, their state, their county, and their state regulations and then our regulations. They have a maze of regulations to go through, and we should be helping them. The threat of civil penalties, higher civil penalties, is significant. It looms large over anyone who has a reporting responsibility. Someone can come to us with a fast track, and we have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, and we say, no, that should have been reported to the agency sooner, and so we're going to slap you with a $4, $5, $6 million penalty. That discourages really a spirit of cooperation.
Well, let me ask Chairman Kaye, in fairness, I don't see this as a partisan issue. Maybe it is, but I don't really see it as such. But, is there a demonstrated track record here? Have there been, can you look back at the last year and say, well, look at what we've done. We've taken, this industry, and we've leveraged their strengths and brought them in, and maybe there's a working group that's helping us on these different projects. Is there evidence that we are better leveraging the private sector and the good companies that are trying to put out good products, and at the same time always knowing it's not, you're not just in some type of real friendship here. It's just collaboration, but you're always watching over them, every company, at all times. I get that too. So how's the past year look? Have you got evidence for us to look at and consider?
I do, and I think a perfect example is what we did, Congressman, on our proposed electronic filing of data elements associated with the single window that I mentioned during my opening statement. So the government is going to have, across the board, 47 agencies at the ports, one window for import and export as opposed to 47 different windows. All the agencies that are participating in that are stress testing their electronic filing systems. We originally proposed to have 10 data elements, 10 different sets of data, and by significant stakeholder engagement with the type of companies you're talking about, we cut that down to 5, and they applauded us for that effort. But I so appreciate the way you asked your question, because it's so rare that there is an acknowledgement that there actually are companies out there that do have bad intent.
No question.
And when we have civil penalty cases, I look very closely at that. Is this a fair exercise of our jurisdiction over those companies? And one of the areas that I've tried to prioritize at the agency is doing a better job of discerning those companies that are playing by the rules and those companies that are not.
I thank you for your testimony. I thank the Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop, and then Mr. Womack.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your attendance here today. I want to touch on two issues. One is the import surveillance program, and the other one is imported hardwood. According to your request in FY15, you said that 80% of your recalled consumer products were imported from outside the country, and you were requesting an increase of $3 million to support 15 new staff as well as equipment for the employees and related costs. But you still project to only cover 7% of U.S. ports, which comprise approximately 65% of all consumer product import entry lands. With your requested funding and staffing, assuming that you got it, approximately how many consumer products would still go unmonitored by CPSC at the ports of entry? And of course, as a follow-up to that, what do you think the resources, equipment, personnel would it take for you to be comfortable that the majority of dangerous products were turned away at the ports of entry? And finally, what are the most problematic ports of entry, and do you have adequate resources to substantially stem the flow of dangerous consumer products there?
Thank you, Congressman, and I apologize you're on our side of the table. I don't know what you did to end up next to us, but we're pleased to have you on this side. So yes, we do currently cover far less than 100%.
You're on the side of the consumers, so.
I appreciate that. I definitely feel that we are. We believe that it makes the most sense. It's far more efficient to catch products at the borders before they get into the United States. They're dispersed into the stream of commerce, and it becomes much more challenging to try to collect those via recall. And as Congressman Quigley mentioned, recall effectiveness is not very high. So if we can get them at the ports before they're distributed, we think that's far better, and we think that's a good investment for Congress. The way we screen right now is we take the data that is provided to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The information that has to be filled out by importers is to identify which consumer line of entries these products fall under. It's just basically tariff codes. And we take those tariff codes and we run it through a pilot system that looks at a certain subset that is likely to give us the highest risk products. It's not everything, but it's the highest risk. And then we target off of that both nationally and in individual ports. As you mentioned in your testimony, as in your question, if we can get these resources that we asked for as part of this next budget, we would be able to get up to about 2/3 of looking at those consumer product tariff codes that are in our jurisdiction. I don't think that's good enough, and I don't think for the American people that meets the expectation that the United States government is standing watch at the ports. As our proposal indicates, we are seeking a permanent funding mechanism to try to get up closer to that 100%. My estimation is that we're talking in about $36 million on an annual basis to try to do that, and that would cover far more personnel at the ports and personnel on the back end at our testing facilities to handle the samples that come in, as well as the IT system to be built to bring it all together.
Thank you. Let me, do you have anything to add?
I do want to talk about import surveillance because it is important. However, I will say that currently our risk assessment methodology that we have is looking at all of the product coming in at all of the ports. The issue we have is not the technology so much as the people. And if we had additional people to review the data, it would be far more effective.
Thank you. With regard to hardwood, you've been investigating the formaldehyde emission levels in the wood flooring products, largely imported from China. And of course, you know, one of those companies has been the center of the issue, but any imported wood flooring products could potentially come from any country, anywhere. The district that I represent in southwest Georgia contains millions of acres of forest land for the production of lumber, and my constituent companies, including wood flooring companies, dutifully comply with the strict standards regarding product safety. So how is the Commission ensuring that safe U.S. products are not supplanted by cheaper imported alternatives which contain hidden dangers for our families across the country?
Do you want
Sure, I'm happy to take that. So we, of course, try not to discriminate between one company or another. And in fact, there is no mandatory federal standard yet for hardwood flooring that is coming down the pike from the EPA in response to a law that was passed by Congress. If that is, in fact, enacted, that rulemaking, then EPA would be enforcing it. Right now, we are approaching these products as being potentially defective. There is the California standard, which does set an emissions level, and we're using that as the basis for our investigation into that particular company. Our belief is that if it is being produced by your constituents we don't have the concern that exists when it's coming from China. And this goes to what Congressman Serrano was asking about earlier, is that the sourcing of the products makes a huge difference. And so if we had the resources and we had the ability to get further up the supply chain, I think that we could do a better job of making sure that those products that are affecting your constituents are not supplanting their work, basically their sales.
If I could add one thing to that, because this is consistent with the theme of our agency reacting rather than being proactive. When it comes to that issue, once again, that was an issue that was raised by CBS. It wasn't something that we saw data, we saw science, and so the issue was brought up within the media. And I think it's very important for us as an agency, again, to look at our data and look at our science and not act in a reactionary way. And I think that goes to the crumb rubber and several other issues. We can't be knee-jerk. We need to be scientific and data.
Well, haven't you found that the formaldehyde in that imported wood flooring was toxic, did you not?
Well, we have not made our final findings at the agency, but
You got some preliminary findings, all right?
to date, it does not indicate that there is a grave concern for a link to cancer.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. The floor just announced we're going to vote at 3:15, so we have 3 remaining questioners. We should have ample time for one round of questions, so let's go to Mr. Womack, then Mr. Yoder, and then Mr. Amadei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, Ms. Burkle, good to see you again. You said a minute ago, Mr. Chairman, that and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something about the fact that you base your research on data, on science, and that's kind of what drives the commission to do its job and to do it effectively. But it seems to me that there is a kind of a breach in your regulatory process in that instead of relying on data or science, that sometimes you and/or members of your staff, instead of working with the manufacturers or the importers on product improvement, that sometimes you end up at a retailer. And you ask, if I could use that word, ask the retailer to stop selling lawful and legal products. Is that a tactic that is in play at the Consumer Product Safety Commission? Is that what you do?
So we absolutely do engage the retailers, and I think Hoverboards is a perfect example because there is no U.S. presence. There's no U.S. manufacturer that we can go to.
Okay, well, let's stipulate to hoverboards. Let's talk window coverings a minute. So, do you, with a wink, encourage retailers to stop selling corded window coverings?
So there's no wink involved. I absolutely have met with CEOs and talked to CEOs of major retailers, and I said, some of your colleagues, Target, IKEA, decided on their own to only sell products that do not kill children. Are you comfortable moving in that direction? And they
Mr.
did.
Chairman, how would you call that anything but intimidation? You are the heavy hand of government standing in a retailer's office, basically intimidating them to the point where they stop selling a product that's on their shelves. How do you justify that?
Well, I don't know if many of them are intimidated, because many of them have not stopped selling their product. And so we've had conversations with them, and some have decided to stop selling it, some have decided, in fact, none of the ones that I've talked to have actually decided to stop selling it. 3 of them have said that in 3 years they will phase out certain products, and the rest have made no determination whatsoever and continue to
So
sell.
let's go back to the science or the data. What's the data telling us? Isn't it like from products made, say, between the mid-'90s and, say, the end of the first decade of the millennium, that window covering, fatal strangulation on corded window coverings was like 1 in 100 million? Is this an area, is that true?
I don't remember exactly what the rate is, but when we look...
Is it close?
It could be, but can I actually explain how we go about assessing risk?
Well,
Because-
because you've got limited time. Let me just get to the essence of my question, is if, in fact, science and data drive your agency, drive your agency, then it would seem to me that this On window coverings specifically, it has become more of a personal crusade rather than a data or science-driven need for our country. And so that's why I say, I find it incredible that anybody associated with the federal government would be in the presence of a retailer selling a lawful product where some rule is not in effect that would render a product unlawful to be sold on a shelf, like at a Walmart or a place like that, and to be suggesting that they don't sell it when it is the agency that could eventually level civil penalties against them. And that's, help me understand how that's a responsible way to conduct business.
So let's talk about the data. 30 years' worth of, on average, a child once a month being hanged to death by these products. That is data. That is very meaningful data to me. When does that end?
Well, did the CPSC ever come up with a standard, a reasonable standard that could be applied to the window covering market? And if it didn't, because it couldn't, based on the data, come up with a reasonable standard, then why would you tell a retailer to quit selling stuff?
But we only started our rulemaking about a year ago. We've been working for 30 years in the voluntary standards process, following Congress's direction to try to get industry working with them collaboratively to address this problem. And every time our technical staff, who have no dog in the fight from a political perspective, come with their suggestions to reasonably address this hazard, they are shut down. I think after waiting 30 years of one child a month, I don't think that's moving too quickly.
Does CPSC have the votes for such a rule?
I have no idea. We voted 5-0 to start the rulemaking. We haven't had a vote since.
Ms. Burkle, let me appeal to you. I mean, look, obviously, I've got a major retailer in my district, and it's the source of thousands and thousands of jobs, and they sell lots and lots of products. And I agree with you that the last thing a company wants to do is be selling products that are a risk to the general public. I mean, let's face it, they also have legal departments that spend a lot of time and money trying to defend themselves on these kinds of things. But is this action by the commission that I guess the chairman has admitted to doing, encouraging retailers not to sell lawful products, is that something that you think is justified within the agency?
I do not think it's justified, and I think one of the things the agency has to do is consider risk. And so if we just pick and choose and assess without assessing risk, we're going to find ourselves going down a lot of inappropriate roads. And I think window coverings is one of them. The risk is 1 in 100 million. That doesn't justify rulemaking. That doesn't justify banning corded products. I've said this to the chairman, and then because he's been frustrated with window coverings companies, the manufacturers of it, he has approached the retailers. And in my humble opinion, I think what we're doing is we're circumventing the rule process. The Administrative Procedures Act makes it clear. There's a way to promulgate a rule. And this isn't it, but you achieve the same end, and that concerns me greatly. The risk doesn't exist here.
I know I've used all my time on this particular question, but I am gravely concerned about the tactic that we've discussed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Kaye, welcome to the committee. Ms. Burkle, good to have you back in Washington with us, and of course, a class of 2010 colleague of ours that we know very well. I want to ask you a little bit about off-road vehicles, and as you know, Mr. Chairman, Congress has required independent scientific review by the National Academy of Sciences, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Department of Defense, of the CPSC's proposed requirements for recreational off-highway vehicles, ROVs. Guess what, if any, ROV rulemaking has occurred in 2016? And if you assume the voluntary standard for ROVs is accepted by ANSI, when do you expect the commission will terminate its notice of proposed rulemaking for ROVs? And if you anticipate it will occur after final publication, how long?
So to answer your first question, zero work has been done on finalizing the rule on ROVs because that's what Congress said. Do not do any work on it, and we have not, and we've been very true to that.
Okay.
We have spent all of our time and effort and resources working with the voluntary standards bodies. There are two of them that have been moving forward with their changes. It's been extremely encouraging. I anticipate and hope that they will end up balloting those or doing final ballots and then publishing them during the remainder of this fiscal year. Our process is, based on our statutes, that once they do that, we will then have our staff make an assessment and send up a recommendation to the commission, and then we'll vote accordingly. If it happens the way it seems to be happening, I know our staff has indicated to date that they've been pleased with the direction that the voluntary standard has taken, and I would imagine that we would proceed accordingly based on the recommendation.
If I could add to that, when it came to the ROV issue, I must say the engagement of Congress and your oversight was extremely helpful and very effective. And the industry worked extremely hard trying to get to a standard, and they put in a lot of time and effort to get to this point where hopefully we will get to a voluntary standard. I do want to talk about engagement, though, because what added to the success of that was this engagement, this technical to technical meeting of the minds. And when it came to the 1110 rule that was brought up earlier, yes, there were meetings, and yes, there was a lot of discussion, but the proposed rule that was so very controversial is what we ended up with, essentially. So all engagement isn't equal. Some is meaningful, some really achieves a good result, and in some cases it doesn't. A meeting for the sake of a meeting, I don't think is effective.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think what we've heard from Mr. Womack and some of the other questions today is certainly that engagement matters when it comes to ultimately getting a good result, in which all the stakeholders have input, and you know, we get a rule, or we get a voluntary standard in this case that is implementable and is consistent with the products that you're regulating. I was interested in the port fees issue, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. Does the CPSC have authority to implement these fees? Is there constitutional authority for this? Do you have legal authority to do this? What's the status of this? Are you looking for authorization from Congress? What's that raise? And in terms of engagement, tell me about the engagement with those who'd be paying the fee. And you know, in some cases, you know, the FDA, the folks who are paying it, you know, want to pay it because they can see better results, and there's a relationship there. Is that the sort of relationship you'd fostered here?
Well, we do have, back to your first question, we do have legal authority to collect the fees. We just don't have legal authority to keep the fees, and that actually does matter. We'd have to return them to the Treasury, and so what we're seeking is that additional legal authority to actually use them. It's been raised that this is per se unconstitutional. That is just flatly wrong. If you look at the Trailer Bridge case from the First Circuit last year, which is 797 F. 3rd 191 for legal folks paying attention. The First Circuit went through a very specific analysis on user fees, and if it's unconstitutional, I don't know why they would have gone through the analysis and declared it to be constitutional and to be appropriate. That doesn't make any sense. And so I think it's important that we actually focus in on what we're asking for and not have red herring arguments about this. Let's discuss it on the merits. We view a user fee proposal that we would put out through normal notice and comment, which would have full stakeholder engagement, as being a very reasonable way to proceed. And we're talking about pennies on the $1,000 per $1,000 of imports, which is much tinier than FDA or anybody else ends up paying. The benefit would be compliant trade would move through much more quickly, and we would be able to focus on non-compliant trade. Going back to the Congressman's questions about, there are some actors out there that are not playing by the rules. We think that the trade community should want us focusing better on those actors that are not paying attention to the rules, and let compliant trade move through much more quickly, so that would be the benefit.
And in terms of the engagement with the stakeholders, you know, is this a situation where they're coming to you and saying, we want to do this and we're part of this, or is it something that's more adversarial?
It has been entirely adversarial. There has not, if there has been somebody out there who is in favor of this in the trade community, I have not heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, so that's an issue, because the folks who might benefit from the advancements in the services you could provide, if they're not wanting to do it, it concerns me that you don't have that level of engagement that you've just expressed is important.
Well,
and you hope to have, but I think that would be a critical part of moving forward.
I think we have the engagement, we just don't like what we're hearing, and they don't like what we're proposing, but I think it's important that they're not opposed to having us have a greater presence at the ports and having it be through general appropriations. They just don't like the user fee. And I think that's important. If Congress wants to allocate the amount of money on an annual basis for us to run this program, we would be very accepting of that.
We have limited time, Ms. Burkle.
I understand, thank you. My concern with the user fee, and I don't consider the Constitution a red herring, I think that Our assessment at the ports is very different than USDA. So they look at every product coming into the country that they have jurisdiction over. We don't do that. We have a risk assessment methodology, so we apply that risk. Some products are subject to that, some are not, and some fall prey to, and they get pulled because they're high risk. And so our benefit is only for some. Every product coming in and everyone we have jurisdiction over will not receive, and I put benefit in quotes, the benefit of us doing a risk assessment. So if everyone doesn't derive the same benefit, then what we're looking at is a tax. And we do not have the power to levy a tax, and I don't think it's a red herring.
Thank you. And now let's turn to Mr. Almaday.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, as you may recall from last year, I started out my questioning with thinking, hey, I'm a process guy. So I'm not going to get into, hey, you should have done this or you should have done that. Not saying that anybody here did that. But I'm looking at an inquiry that I got from some folks who are in the bromine business, and which is an additive for flame retardants and stuff like that. And they have set forth a series of facts here that says, hey, you got a petition from some folks, and they met with the commission, and they said that the commission said, hey, we're going to accept the petition and do some rulemaking. And I haven't followed it that closely, but my initial concern is I think you guys, at least to some extent, are a quasi-judicial outfit. And so there's 5 of you, and so it takes 3 to decide to do something, I guess. And so I'm wondering if I can come to you as somebody and go, hey, what do we need to do to gin up before you've done formal action in terms of, are you prejudging whether or not to take it? What are the criteria? But I don't want you to weigh in yet. That's kind of a smaller one. My main one is this. When we talk about, and listen, bromine's toxic, so we don't need to talk about, geez, how come you're saying it's toxic? I mean, I think everybody says that. But when I'm looking at some of the stuff, like the Administrative Procedures Act, which I believe applies to you, and actually an executive order, which we think probably ought to be followed, you know, that's kind of a switch some days, which guides OMB that'll ultimately review your work product, that says, hey, agencies should not and may not promulgate rules that are overlapping or contradictory to rules created by or being discussed by another agency, which brings us to primary EPA jurisdiction over toxic rules. The Senate has recently, be listening carefully, the Senate has recently taken action on something that has to do with, you know, the Toxic Substances Control Act, or whatever the appropriate name is. So I'm just wondering, in terms of, hey, resources are scarce, we've got some OMB stuff that applies. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, but as the primary agency with control over toxic substances, is this something that you are at least contemplating saying, let's see what the new stuff from the Congress is, which I know could mean we would all be dead of old age before that happens, but the Senate actually acted, so maybe we're going to get something. But in terms of at least waiting until the EPA does their thing to at least see when the dust settles, what, if anything, is appropriate, instead of duplicating, perhaps sending mixed messages. Help me on that process.
So, first of all, I definitely remember our exchange from last year, and I really appreciated it. And as I mentioned to you when we spoke last year, I have the same view of process. And so on the petition, all we did was docket it, which means they just met the basic criteria for the commission to have it under consideration. We've done nothing beyond that other than have what was like an 8-hour hearing where we had the world come and testify about these issues. At this point, now it is, and we got 1,000 pages of additional questions for the record, comments in response to that we have to go through. We have taken no further action, and it will take a long time for our staff to process all that information and to provide a recommendation as to whether we should grant the petition, whether we should defer on the petition, or deny the petition.
Okay. So deferral is an option.
Deferral is option.
Okay.
It's always an option when it's sent up by the staff. The issue that you mentioned on chemicals is exactly why I was so pleased that we were able to get EPA and CDC to work with us to have a coordinated effort on Chrome Rubber, because I think that is the better way to go. And if it turns out that there is conclusive evidence that EPA is acting on a specific area that affects our jurisdiction, there's no reason for us to waste the time to go about doing something about it. So if that ends up happening and they clear the field and do something, great. If they don't, though, and sometimes because it's consumer products and they may be looking at an underlying chemical, but they're not looking at that interaction, it does come back to us, and then we have a question that we do have to resolve.
Then it would be appropriate.
Thank you.
I do want to say one thing about the petition, and that is, it's unprecedented that petition was even docketed, given the breadth and the scope of the chemicals, and what the petition is asking for, that we would classify chemicals in a class rather than individually. And that seems like a very broad and inappropriate use of the petition. In my opinion, it probably should not have been docketed.
Well, I guess since my time is limited, and the chairman manages, and I won't refer to it in speed dating in this hearing, because I came to regret that in the prior hearing, Mr. Chairman, so please strike that reference from the record. We'll continue to watch, and may ask you to come in offline and just say, okay, just kind of keep us appraised of how that's working with EPA vis-à-vis and your stuff.
Absolutely. If I may just give you 3 seconds. It's not the staff's fault that somebody brought a broad petition. If it meets it's an objective criteria. If it meets the underlying criteria, the staff has to docket it. There's nothing inappropriate about bringing a petition that we would docket. It's somebody just happened to bring something broad.
But it is broad enough that we're banning classes of chemicals, which I think is, I don't think that should have been docketed.
We look forward to more discussion. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, and thank the witnesses for your testimony today. Thank you for being here. As Mr. Serrano said at the beginning, you have a very important job protecting people that are using products, thousands of products every day. So thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Meeting is adjourned.